All right, well, I have the task of wrapping us up, which I want to do by trying to provide some glue to some of the ideas that have been all over the place, but connected today and our first day together, and to try to pull out some threads of the conversation that just happened about what we do next and what might be actionable. So I wanted to start by reminding us about sustainable infrastructure and what we mean when we say infrastructure. And this is how we started our discussion on the first day. And it's an interesting term because it means a lot of things, and I think that we've grappled a lot and have been looking at a lot of different aspects of infrastructure. So I thought I'd kind of talk through what a more traditional infrastructure is, because I think that's something that we understand a bit more and resonates with us a bit more. So I'd like to use the DC metro system as our example of infrastructure. Yeah, I'll get there. So, the point of an infrastructure like this is to try to move people to lots of different places, not all moving to the same place. But that in order to have this infrastructure, there's different aspects of the infrastructure. There's the physical structure, there's the soft structure. But what we see with the DC Metro in a very straightforward way, there's a lot of lines, a lot of ways to get from point A to point B, and there's multiple destinations, and you might even have to go to one destination in order to transfer to a new destination. There's a lot of players that keep the Metro going. There's the lead group, which is the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, but of course there's the city of DC, the police department, the state of Virginia, the county of Fairfax, all kinds of things that keep the Metro going. The Metro has policies. There are rules associated with the Metro. Do not eat or drink on the Metro, or you will be arrested, I understand. There's also culture associated with the Metro. Stand on the right, move on the left. That's a very well-known part of the Metro culture. The Metro had to be built. People invested in the Metro and the building of the Metro. And that was done because people researched how the Metro should be built. Not just the engineering, but the geology, how people move, where you want your stops to be, which stop we should be. So people really thought about and researched how that happened. And then after the Metro has been built, the Metro has actually adapted. People wanted a new line to go to Dulles. The Silver Line exists. When I lived in DC over 10 years ago, the Metro stopped running at like 10 o'clock at night. That adapted. That's great. It runs till like 3:30 in the morning on weekends now. I would have killed for that when I lived here and was actually young and could stay up till 3:30 in the morning. The other interesting thing about the Metro is when it's not working, people can still get to where they want to go. There are still ways to get from where you are to where you're going. So this is what I want to use as the jumping off point to how to kind of think about this in the science communication and engagement world. Because I think when we started our first day, what we found is that we heard from scientists who are passionate, they are determined, they will walk through the snow to get to where they're going because they care about it and they see value in this. So even if there's no infrastructure, scientists are still communicating. Scientists are still finding their way to do it. That is going to happen. But when the Metro is created, you can move a lot more people to a lot more destinations. And I personally feel like that's desirable. I'd like to have more scientists have more pathways to communicate for different reasons. And that infrastructure we build around science communication could make it more possible, easier, and even rewarded for scientists. So I actually love this. There's a blog in Ireland called communicatescience.eu, and their logo is that of the London Underground, which I thought was really appropriate for this analogy that I'm trying to draw right now. So to think about how the Metro infrastructure relates to science communication. So Dan Sarowitz on the last day of our on our first day of gathering, at the end of the day, he really challenged us and said, what are you even building an infrastructure towards? Why are we even having this conversation about infrastructure? What's your goal? Where are you going? And I think we all kind of left that day feeling like, I don't know, is it a road to nowhere? Does it just end? Do we all have a shared goal? But in reality, I think what's happening is that we've all really realized that we have multiple goals and multiple destinations, and that is okay. So here's kind of the schematic of the Metro map. Now, I was hoping today that one of the things that would happen is some of these goals would be elucidated, so we just sort of feel like we know where we're sending everyone. On the funding panel this morning that David Malikoff moderated, he asked everyone, why do you fund science communications? And I have to admit, I came up with this last night, and I was excited about typing in quickly today what all the destinations are, why the reasons people fund science communication. And I didn't really hear that, which I think is an interesting kind of point for our wrap-up today. I heard things like, it can improve your health, we need to improve public science literacy. I have very specific goals, like my conservation goals that my foundation funds. Science is really cool, and the world should know that science is cool. STEM education needs to be better. I don't think if we went through an exercise to define these dots, this is really what we would come up with. We might come up with some of these, but I think one of the take-homes for me for this and for all of us is that we need a little more work on articulating what our stops are in our infrastructure. But we did have a little more clarity on, what our lines are, that there should be communications trainings for scientists, that journalists should be trained in communication, or in science and communications, hopefully, that we need boundary organizations, the need for local places for scientists to connect with local communities, scientists connecting with K-12 education. And one of the reasons I feel like this metro analogy works is you don't just have to do one of these, and any one of these coupled with something else can get you further or get you somewhere else. And so it shows that if we have a thorough infrastructure, we have more options and we can probably get there smoother. Partial infrastructures work, and they still do move people, and that's okay too. So as we think about building this sustainable infrastructure, I just want to think about all the different things that relate to infrastructure that I just talked about. There are destinations, and for this, like I said, I don't think we have articulated what these are yet, and we probably need to do so. And then there are pathways, like trainings, like boundary organizations, all the other things we described. I think that we feel like we know what some of those things are. We have some ideas about new things, and we should spend a little more time on that. There are organizations that are involved in this space, whether they're government, academic, industry. Policies, and so we didn't really come up a lot with this. I heard a couple suggestions today about, all grants should require communications as part of their grant, and that there would be part of the funding structure to do that. Could we come up with policies like that? And of course, the stand on the right, walk on the left example for science communication is the scientific culture and promotion and tenure and how we think about that. The research and design is something we learned a lot on day one, which is what do we know about the science of science communication, and that's a really critical part of how we develop our infrastructure and understanding that and picking where we're going to go and why we're going to go there and how we're going to get there. And I think Bruce this morning reminded us that we don't really know how to get there, but the state of the science can kind of tell us a little bit about what we know about different places along the way. And then of course we have to build it, and building it takes an architect, engineers, and it also takes funding, and it takes maintenance. So I'm going to say this for the third time, because we know in communications if you say things 3 times they stick. We still don't really know what our goals are for these stations, and that's something that we should be thinking about more. And then the other thing that we don't know is once we actually describe what these stations are, how do we know when we've arrived there? Is there monitoring and evaluation that can be done to help us see, are we where we even wanted to go in the first place? And I sense after these past 2 days that we kind of don't have good ways to do that either. So I think that that's a take home as well. Now, the last session that we just did, I tried to pull out some actual tangible things that we can do leaving this room. I am a big fan, as I think Erica said or someone else said, about spending time in meetings like this and knowing what you might do differently when you move forward. And I feel like we do have a lot more questions than answers at this point. I also feel like that's okay, and we should be finding ways to tackle those. But I think the biggest take home for me overall, and especially being at this meeting with all of you and people I'd never even met before who have been thinking about this in different sectors, has helped me a lot think about this. And just the convening function that the academies has played for us has been really powerful in moving this issue forward. And this concept of all of us working across our communities, whether you're a researcher or a practitioner or scientist in government, I think to me this is the #1 thing that we can do, is really spend more time connecting together. I loved what Martin said about how there are we're thinking about new journals coming out on this, new publications for a new community to coalesce around this, more things like this, like Sackler starting to do it. I think us getting together more is a good thing for now, that we don't quite have our community of practice around science engagement to a point where we can really think about the collective infrastructure. And that goes for the researchers who study science of science communication, and the practitioners who actually practice the science of science communication need to do a lot better being connected with each other, which is happening and starting to happen. As Kai suggested over the loudspeaker, invest in what we're learning along the way as we're figuring this out. Get our community of practice together, and then really think about, as Erica suggested, are things we can do to have collective monitoring and evaluation around what we're doing. And then, of course, I'd be remiss and a bad executive director of my organization if I didn't highlight one more time that the number one thing that we said we should do is invest in communications training. The two interesting things I heard about this, though, is that the grad level is really important, and that there is action on that in the graduate education effort that NSF and COMPASS and others that around the table have been involved in is thinking about that. And I really like what Rick suggested in terms of shifting existing dollars away from media training that's about institutional promotion to these kinds of things. So it's not new money, it's reallocating existing money. So these were the big take-homes I had from today, the biggest being us being more connected, I think will really help us build that sustainable infrastructure. This is the first picture I showed when we kicked off our meeting on day one. And I remember starting this meeting and saying, here are pictures of all kinds of different ways that scientists communicate and engage, and we're going to get together to talk about how this happens. We're not going to talk about whether or not it's a good thing. We just want to talk about how they do it. And it's interesting to reflect on that now, because what's really happened is we have talked about how they do it, but we've also really spent a lot of time talking about and identifying that we need to talk more about why they would even do it. And I think that that's a big next step, too. So with that, that's the end, unless anyone else has concluding thoughts they want to add to make sure we hold as we adjourn. Well, I really thank you guys for your investment today. For those of you who came back, for participating online, we got a lot of great tweets and questions, and Kai for chiming in over the speakers, and the academies for hosting the space to bring us together. And I hope we can continue to stay connected. Thanks, everybody.